Welcome everyone to this EU-Japan webinar series on COVID-19. The topic of today is connectivity. There is simultaneous interpretations in Japanese and English, so those of you who have difficulties in English or Japanese, you touch the interpretation button at the lower part of your screen and you will be able to change language as we go along. My name is Marie Soderberg and I am the director of something called the European Institute of Japanese Studies at Stockholm School of Economics, where I'm also an adjunct professor, and I will be guiding you through this seminar. This is the last seminar in a series of 9, and some of you might very well know the background to why we are doing this, but I still want to get back to stepping up of cooperation between EU and Japan. Besides an economic partnership, that is a free trade agreement that we have in place now, and which was started to be implemented 1st of February 2019. We also have a legally binding strategic partnership agreement. This is a political theme and it aims to facilitate common solutions to common challenges such as climate change, energy supply and threats to security. It is to help the EU and Japan to jointly promote peace and stability and prosperity globally, as well as to create an open international system. And I think it's a very important document at this time of history. We have decided to tackle things together, and now with the COVID-19, which is on everyone's mind, we have a real crisis and profound changes are going to take place in the way we live our lives and how business and the international order is set up by COVID-19. And Japan and EU now has this strategic partnership agreement through which we can cooperate and try to tackle this. We're both champions of development cooperation. We should be able to assist other countries, both for humanitarian reasons, but also for our own sake. We need the world together if we are going to combat COVID-19, nothing that we can do on our own. This webinar series has been arranged by a special support facility set up by the EU for actually implementing the strategic partnership agreement and try to find concrete issues where we can cooperate and where we should cooperate to promote a better world. And as things are changing so quickly now, this is really important. So far, the webinar series have covered green recovery. If you don't know, the Green Deal is an overarching theme for the EU and at top of everything now. We'll have business, international trade, digitalization of society, public health systems, research and innovation, energy and climate change. And now, finally, the last seminar, the one we have today, is about connectivity. And this is very important in the sense that it can be said to be the glue to all the other areas. No connectivity, we won't get any cooperation between us and any changes. Especially sustainable connectivity is a real buzzword in EU politics. I might need to explain what it means to our Japanese listeners and participants in this seminar. It is a geopolitical tool that cuts across all aspects of our life. Basically, there are 4 fields. One is about transport, building roads, linking existing and future transparent transport networks. Very often this is in what in Japan is called infrastructure, quality infrastructure development, and it has both a hard part and a soft part. It's also about custom clearance and things like that. We also have energy as an issue. Energy platforms are very important to combat climate change and so forth. Interconnected regional energy platforms is one of the issues that is important in connectivity. We also have digital communication as one issue, and as we are all here now sitting in a webinar where I'm sitting in my home in Sweden talking with you in Tokyo or Brussels or wherever you are, this is of course an important part also of connectivity. And also here maintaining high level of protection and on consumer and personal data is important for the EU. Then we have a human dimension, advanced cooperation in education, research, innovation, culture and tourism. And these are things which are also issues of connectivity. But COVID-19 has demonstrated that there can be problems with new dependencies on connectivity. Not to speak of this human resource thing, it's very difficult to send students to Japan at the moment. It's difficult for them to enter and so forth. So also we have the supply chains which are in trouble right now. There's a risk with those. We can understand that too much connectivity can also, and dependence on connectivity can also create problems. The connectivity that we want to promote is built on Japan and EU shared norms, which is also important. And standard setting is something that could be used to create a better world in those turbulent times. We should grasp the opportunity to do so now. We will touch on various aspects of connectivity. Before I give the floor over to the speakers, I want to point out another important agreement that has been done between the EU and Japan. That is the Partnership on Sustainable Connectivity and Quality Infrastructure, signed at the end of September 2019 by Abe and President Juncker in Brussels. In this agreement, both EU and Japan, and I quote here, agreed to promote free, open, rule-based, fair, non-discriminatory, and predictable regional and international trade. All very important issues. Transparent procurement practices, ensuring of debt sustainability and high standards of economic, fiscal, financial, social, and environmental sustainability. All very important issues. The agreement, according to my view, combines what the EU aspires for, sustainable connectivity, with what Japan is aiming for, that is quality infrastructure. So we now work together on those issues. It is also part of an effort by both EU and Japan to revive multilateralism, not to forget about multilateralism. We need to have all countries on board to change in the present world system. It will not take, I will not talk too much now. We have a number of very interesting speakers, which I will present as we go along in this webinar. 4 speakers. We are lucky to have the EU Commissioner and Special Coordinator for Connectivity, the Director of the European Policy Division at the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as representatives from European Investment Bank and JBIC. I will introduce the speakers as they come along. But to start, the importance of the SPA and the topic of connectivity has also led 2 ambassadors, one from each side, wanting to make video remarks to put emphasis on this topic and the importance of cooperation. First, I would like to introduce to you the EU ambassador to Japan, Ms. Patricia Floor, who have made a short video message, which we will see now.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, The focus of today's webinar is the question of how significant the EU-Japan connectivity partnership is in the context of global efforts to recover from the coronavirus pandemic. It is already evident that the virus hits all countries, but hits the economy of many developing countries harder. How can connectivity projects financed by the EU and/or Japan contribute to overall recovery? With or without COVID-19, connectivity in transport, energy, digital, and people-to-people exchange is key to ensuring a sustainable and resilient world. So what can the EU and Japan do together to add value? The EU-Japan Connectivity Partnership was signed by Prime Minister Abe and European leaders at the first Europa Connectivity Forum in Brussels in September 2019. It followed two other major recent achievements in Japan-EU cooperation, the Economic Partnership Agreement and the Strategic Partnership Agreement. Our EPA made Japan and the EU flag bearers of free trade, while the SPA made us strategic partners across all fields of policy, from security over digital to connectivity. At the core of our partnership is the commitment to a rules-based international order with a level playing field underpinned by global standards and multilateral cooperation. Because we both believe that such an order is the primary condition for peace, stability, and prosperity. So that is our overarching goal. The partnership on sustainable connectivity and quality infrastructure with Japan is also the very first of its kind concluded by the EU. It tells us where we want to go together towards a kind of connectivity which is sustainable in the long run and promotes the full and effective implementation of the Paris Agreement, as well as the implementation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. With these objectives in mind, the EU and Japan should work together on all dimensions of connectivity, bilaterally, multilaterally, including transport, digital, energy networks, and people-to-people exchange, from the Indo Pacific to the Western Balkans or Africa. No doubt, connectivity in a globalizing world is a mega trend of the 21st century. Rapidly growing interconnectedness between and among countries provides unprecedented opportunities for well-being, cross-country cooperation, and global resilience. However, the COVID-19 pandemic brutally exposed the downside, the fragility and vulnerability of an interconnected, interdependent world. Everyday life was disrupted everywhere, also in Asia and in Europe. People-to-people contacts became difficult. Supply chains nobody had thought about for decades suddenly were disrupted. Unwelcome and potentially risky dependencies became obvious. By now, we should have understood that restarting and rebuilding our lives and economies after the pandemic cannot simply mean to go back to our old ways. It means to establish and re-establish connectivity in a new way, including in a more digital way, which reflects lessons learned during the crisis. Most importantly, we should aim for a green recovery, which accelerates the transition to a carbon-neutral and circular economy supported by the necessary energy networks. Therefore, the challenge today is for our joint efforts to combine both sustainable, standard and rules-based connectivity with the required resilience and security even under crisis conditions, and to team up EU with Japan and third partners to do this. Ultimately, the coronavirus has added an additional dimension to our joint activity agenda. The key task now is to identify suitable projects for our cooperation, coordinate the project work between our different institutions and a third country, and secure financing, notably incentivizing the private sector. All of this remains as complicated as before and takes a lot of effort. That is why the EU and Japan are actively engaged in promoting implementation of the connectivity partnership, and both recognize the importance of unlocking private and public investment. Your discussion today will contribute to identifying promising next steps to move forward in this direction. The EU delegation has been organizing a series of EU-Japan webinars to look at the impact of COVID-19 on specific policy areas such as business, digitalization, trade, public health, research and innovation, climate change, and energy. This webinar on connectivity marks the end of this successful series, and it underlines again the importance of the EU-Japan partnership. I'm very pleased that Ambassador Romana Vlahutin, Ambassador at Large for Connectivity from the European External Action Service, will be the main speaker for the EU side. I wish you a fruitful discussion, and I'm looking forward to your recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This really puts some pressure on all of us, but I'm sure we will manage to come up with ideas as we have such good speakers. Nextly, I would like to introduce Ambassador Yasashi Masaki, who is the new Japanese ambassador to the EU, who will make some remarks as well on a video.
Hello, dear Ambassador Patricia Flo, dear Ambassador Romana Vlahutin, and distinguished participants. So this is Yasushi Masaki, new Japanese ambassador to the EU. Thank you very much today to invite me to this EU-Japan webinar series on COVID-19, and the subject of today is connectivity. Thank you very much. So I'm still in Tokyo, but I think when you participate in this webinar, I will be Brussels. And so I think this webinar is very important for the relation between Japan and the EU. During these several years, Japan-EU relations have been developed enormously in a very high speed, thanks to the two treaties, EPA and SPA. And connectivity is one of the concrete outcome of this good cooperation between Japan and the EU. I remember very well when I was a Director General of European Affairs or Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, I attended a very important seminar, Europe Connectivity Forum, which was held last year, September, in Brussels. And leaders of Japan and the EU have signed a very important document, which is called the Partnership on Sustainable Connectivity and Quality Infrastructure between Japan and the European Union. And based on this document, our cooperations has been concretized. And Japan and the EU now is trying to find out same project, same object, such as sustainable connectivities or high-quality infrastructures, global issues such as environments, and defense and security policy coordinations. Those areas are very important, prioritized areas to cooperate together between the EU and Japan. Especially the connectivity is a very important area of cooperations. Actually, EU and Japan try to find out the concrete projects, which are covering very vast areas, including Indo Pacific areas and the Western Balkans. And especially, we are prioritizing the areas such as digital, transport, energy, or human exchanges. And I think these cooperations will be coordinated very well with also the EPA between Japan and the EU. Unfortunately, by the COVID crisis, the positive effect of EPA was controlled or strained. But I hope those two treaties will strengthen our relation between Japan and the EU. And unfortunately, COVID crisis has changed the landscape. But still, we think that the important cooperations in the area of connectivity will be valid after the crisis of COVID. And COVID really has changed our economic situations, also the social situations. But also we have to accept that as an opportunity to encourage the social change. And we remember very well, at the first stage of the outbreak of the COVID, every country is obliged to think of their own interests. And certain countries has to close their borders, and those kind of actions are really contrary to the idea or concept of connectivity. But still, we are now back to this original idea of the importance of connectivity. Today is a very symbolic event. We can very well discuss online on the subject of connectivities, and especially I think EU and Japan will agree on that point. In the eras of after Corona, or the era of living with Corona, digital transformations have become very important. It should be accelerated. I think in this digital transformations cooperations, EU and Japan have a lot of things to work together in this context of connectivity. We have had a very good TV conference between former Prime Minister Abe and President Michel and President von der Leyen last May. We really reaffirmed the importance of the cooperation between the EU and Japan. So far, unfortunately, we have not realized the face-to-face summit between the EU and Japan. But I hope that we will hold that at the earlier stage to confirm our concrete cooperations between the EU and Japan, especially in the areas of connectivities. And we have a new government led by Prime Minister Mr. Suga, and already Prime Minister Suga has had a very good telephone conversation with President Michel. And I think he's going to having the same kind of good conversation with President von der Leyen very soon. And two leaders agree that we will continue our cooperation in the areas of free trade, climate change, and the digital transformations. I think continuity of our cooperation between the EU and Japan are so important. And we have to show once more that Japan and the EU are very strong strategic partnership, especially in these areas of connectivity which you are discussing now. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in Brussels after my arrival to Brussels. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to say too to the two ambassadors, and we are now getting into the live session. And as you heard, they are looking forward to recommendations and what we can do in these fields. I also want to alert the audience to the chat function that is below on this page, where you can actually ask questions to the participants. The speakers can ask, you can ask questions to the speakers, and I will try to let as many as possible of your questions forward or suggestions forward to our speakers. So please use the chat function. Anyway, I want to start with our first speaker, which is Ambassador Romana Vlahutin, EES Special Coordinator for Connectivity. You are the one who really knows this field and who hopefully will be able to implement as well some connectivity. Please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, and good morning from Brussels. When we started 20 minutes ago, I wanted to say welcome, good morning from sunny Brussels, but the sun is gone in the meantime. So this is how it is here. I'm very, very happy to join you, to join colleagues in Tokyo as well. I really believe, and basically a lot of my speech has already been used by our two ambassadors and you, Mary, that this connectivity issue is going to be with us for a very long time. It is one of the key trends of the 21st century, and it is pivotal for us to understand all the benefits and all the vulnerabilities of this connectivity thing. European Union and Japan have signed partnership 1 year and maybe 3 weeks ago, but the time that we had to really implement was much shorter. I always say we signed it 1 year minus 8 months of the COVID crisis. However, these last months have, on the other hand, brought us an urgency to think better and to think faster. It really galvanized thinking on our side, and given that the context has changed, we need to sort of rethink on how to work on our partnership in a more concrete way. You already mentioned, and our other speakers as well, the crisis has highlighted the importance of connectivity, but also its vulnerabilities. And I think the issue of interdependencies it creates is very important. You mentioned supply chains, resilience, digital security, but it also reconfirmed the importance of functional multilateralism and the common principles that led us to sign this partnership in the first place. There is a lot of reflection going on, and the crisis has brought, again, this urgency to think on how we can use it as an opportunity to think in a more focused way and use the recovery that will be massive, that will require massive funding to build back better. It's very interesting to look at the numbers. The World Bank has an analysis which says that for every 1% of GDP that you invest in connectivity, the return in developed countries is 2%, but in developing countries is 7%. So just by the mere number, you see what a major opportunity this can bring. We signed our partnership because we believed that working together, EU and Japan can bring new value, not only for Japan and the EU, but for our partners as well. The convergence of the fundamental principles has proven as strong as ever and is ensuring continuity, although in the meantime there was a change of leadership both here in the EU and in Japan. But I don't think that it will have any effects apart from the positive ones on the continuity of what we have started a year ago. It's very important, and the adherence to the fundamental principles and discussion and insisting on principles is important because it keeps the bar high in terms of standards and sustainability, and this is one of the main things that we need to be extremely sort of persistent about. European Union and Japan at the same time, besides the principles and the convergence of principles, have real capacities to implement them. We have technological capacities, we have financial capacities. We can talk about the numbers later on. And by working together, we simply also reinforce each other's strengths. We help our partners in low to mid-income countries to become more resilient and more competitive. And we have seen throughout the crisis how this resilience is of extreme importance. There are three elements to our partnership that, again, will help us, and I hope will guide us also through the discussion to see how we can do it better. Again, I will reiterate the principles are key, but in order to be able to implement them in full force, we need systemic solutions for building concrete projects on the ground at a scale that brings visible change. Second, we really need to talk much more about finances. And this is why I'm very happy that we will be joined by colleagues from JBIC and the EIB and discuss this, because connectivity is very, very expensive, and it cannot be done without involvement of private capital and innovative financing. Also, there is already a lot going on, but it's not visible. And it's not visible because somehow there is a difference between connectivity and connectedness. Building a sporadic piece of infrastructure is not connectivity. Connectivity really implies that you look at it in a very systemic way. There are a number of very important projects going on, but we have to find a way to sort of refocus and approach this in a more coherent fashion. We can talk, and I'm sure that our colleagues from EIB and JBIC will mention them, projects like the wind farm in Egypt, geothermal plant in Kenya, rehabilitation of roads in Georgia, all of these worth billions, but somehow you don't hear about them. You don't really see them, because they are done sort of in a separate and a fashion which does not look at the connectivity as a system. We also have some important differences to overcome, especially in the methodology. We have different budget cycles, and my good friend Yoshitake-san knows this very well, how we were looking into these differences and trying to overcome them so that we can move on with greater force. The partnership itself, besides the bilateral dimension, has, I would say, a key element of working together in 5 regions. We have identified Indo Pacific, Africa, Central Asia, Eastern neighborhoods for the EU, and the Balkans as those 5 regions. So what we are doing at the moment, we are in the middle of an analytical overview of what our partnership and with the partnership, of course, with those regions can bring to them in terms of more connectivity. Second, and I think that should be a good part of our discussion after these initial speeches, we need much more effective utilization of cooperation between our financial institutions. There is there are already things going on, but there are MOUs that the EIB has signed with JBIC, NEXI, JICA, and it would be important to see how these can be used more and better. We have to do everything we can to support even more our businesses. I think colleagues from the EU-Japan Industrial Center are with us, and it would be great if they can come in later on and explain what is being done. But just for you, an important figure that has been mentioned a lot, that around 70, almost up to 70% of the European businesses go to Japan, not for Japanese market, but to go together with Japanese businesses in third markets. I think that they are realizing something that is a growing trend, and we should support them. And finally, and my favorite part, we really need to think out of the box. We are in a new situation, and I would be grateful for the participants in the seminar to ask us as hard questions as possible, but also come up with ideas on how we can do this better. We have or we should look at the methodology of project pipelines. It's a methodology that looks at regions in a sort of comprehensive way. So you don't look into infrastructure of only one country, but how that infrastructure can be utilized to make more coherent regions and then link to other regions as well. Second, we should think of how we can capitalize on our respective regional specialization. For example, Southeast Asia, Japan would know more than European Union, but in the Western Balkans and Eastern neighborhood, we might know more than Japan. And I think we need to use this to our joint advantage. We should maybe discuss a bit possibilities of creating joint investment funds, of creating a joint technical assistance fund, of creating venture capital funds for startups, everything that would bring systemic approach to this very comprehensive issue. And finally, we also need to find very effective way to have proper dialogue with our partners in those regions. I think all of this absolutely needs to be always done with not only full transparency, but full agreement and understanding what are the needs and how we can help fulfill them. I will stop here because I think especially for the last part, for the questions, that would be the best takeaway for us as those who are in charge of supporting the implementation of the partnership, to think how we can do this in a more effective way. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And audience, you all heard she wants hard questions and suggestions for what we really can do together. So this is your chance to get the top official in EU and tell her what you want us to do. Thank you very much, and we will come back to question and answers, and we will see more of Ambassador Valutina at that stage. Now I want to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Yoshitake, Shogo Yoshitake, and you are the Director of the European Policy Division at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan. We would like to hear your views on how Japan sees this. Please go ahead.
Madam Soderberg, thank you very much. My name is Shogo Yoshitake. I'm talking from Tokyo, Japan. It is my great opportunity to express the views concerning connectivity. But what I think is much more important is to discuss about this very difficult but important issue. And having said that, I hope that my short speech will give you some kind of seeds for the discussions. And also, I want to emphasize that my speech will include 3 elements. First, the diplomacy of new Suga administration. Second, the Japan-EU cooperation on connectivity. And thirdly, towards concrete cooperation. And allow me to speak in Japanese.
Please go ahead.
正木大使、フロア大使のオープニングスピーチにもありました。
So we heard from Ambassador Floor and Ambassador Masaki that the issue of connectivity is very important. First of all, I would like to talk about the foreign policy of the new Suga cabinet. The Prime Minister Suga won the election for president of the Liberal Democratic Party by declaring that he would continue former Prime Minister Abe's foreign policy. Now, 60% of the high approval rating for Suga shows that there is a public strong support for this policy. And especially the free and open Indo Pacific realization is very important in this foreign policy. Vietnam and Indonesia new Prime Minister visited, and in Vietnam, he delivered a speech building together the future of Indo Pacific, in which Prime Minister Suga affirmed his full support for the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific adopted by ASEAN last year, which has much in common with Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific. And he stressed his desire to work together for further prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. At the same time, in his speech, Prime Minister Suga mentioned the resilience of physical infrastructure and soft infrastructure and digital supply chain to improve connectivity. The spread of the new coronavirus has heightened the need for further economic and social digitization to cope with the outbreak, and the need to reduce the risk of disruption of supply chain, and then build a sustainable supply chain to maintain the international supply chains. This is a challenge not only for ASEAN and Japan, but also for the EU and Japan, mentioned by two ambassadors. With regard to this free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP, improving connectivity is one of the three pillars, along with efforts to achieve universal values and maritime security for Japan. In a courtesy call by U.S. State Secretary Pompeo, Prime Minister Suga confirmed the strengthening of the U.S.-Japan alliance and close cooperation with like-minded countries to realize the FOIP, including efforts such as Japan, US, Australia, India foreign ministers meeting. So in a summit call with the UK, they agreed to strengthen a security cooperation for the realization of FOIP or FOIP, and in a phone call with a French leader, they confirmed their cooperation for the realization of free and open Indo-Pacific region as a fellow Indo-Pacific nations. And as for EU, Prime Minister called for the need for cooperation and coordination to realize a FOIP in his telephone talks with European Council President Mr. Michel, and also European Commission President Ms. von der Leyen. And also we are encouraged that Germany will work with France to promote concepts based on the Indo-Pacific guidelines in the EU. With regard to EU-Japan cooperation on connectivity, in the Indo-Pacific region, improving connectivity between the EU and Japan is directly linked to the realization of the FOIP, Free Open Indo-Pacific. The phrase Indo-Pacific, as mentioned by Ambassador Brafutin, is identified in the connectivity document of September 2019 as one of the priority areas for EU-Japan cooperation. Despite the change in the leadership of both sides, Japan and EU, the document remains the basis for EU-Japan cooperation, and its importance actually is increasing. As Ambassador Floor mentioned, the EU has chosen Japan as its first partner for cooperation on connectivity. Japan had already been working with the US, Australia, India, and UK, and France to achieve a FOIP. And for example, efforts are being made with India to strengthen connectivity in third countries such as Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. So the EU-Japan connectivity document has three main points. The first is the fundamental principle of increasing connectivity and promoting high-quality infrastructure, which is described in paragraph 3 as adhering to international standards such as transparency, openness, economy, and debt sustainability. And last year in G20 in Osaka, the high-quality infrastructure principles were shared, so it echoes those principles. And secondly, it is an area of geographic it is a geographic area of cooperation between EU and Japan. So as in paragraph 2, it states that EU will not only increase the connectivity in its neighboring regions such as Eastern Europe, Western Balkans, Central Asia, and North Africa, but also undertake connectivity initiatives in the Indo Pacific. Also, the EU and Japan have a strong legal framework of EPA and SPA. This third country cooperation represents the next generation of EU-Japan cooperation that goes beyond the cooperation between the two parties. The thirdly, examples of areas of cooperation are given, such as transport, energy, science and technology, and people-to-people exchanges. This shows that the connectivity is not only about physical infrastructure, but also soft infrastructure and even technical. In addition, judicial and supply chain resilience emerged as a new challenge in the fight against the spread of new coronavirus. The areas of connectivity in which the EU and Japan will need to work together are likely to expand further. So based on the connectivity document, the EU and Japan are working towards a concrete cooperation that would drive the realization of FOIP. So these efforts will indicate the responsibilities of the EU and Japan as a global leaders. Finally, I would like to talk about the concrete cooperation between the two. Connectivity is a broad concept. Concrete cooperation in infrastructure, digital transport, energy development, science and technology, people-to-people exchanges will be pursued by drawing on the frameworks that exist between the EU and Japan. In particular, we would like to show the international community the connectivity projects that Japan and the EU are working on, such as road and transport infrastructure projects, scientific and technological cooperation, and human resource development. In developing countries, there are strong needs for development. But what is important is that they need to comply with the international standards because that is conducive to their development. The case of the Hamband port in Sri Lanka is not a project that takes debt sustainability or other international standards into account. The use of private sector funding and technology is essential to promote concrete cooperation. I understand there will be a report from JBIC representative, and the Japanese government would like to cooperate closely with them. Furthermore, geopolitical changes are occurring as a result of the spread of the novel coronavirus. In addition to addressing the new challenges of digital and supply chain resilience, the battle of narratives emerged as a new aspect, as High Representative Mr. Borrell has noted. Disinformation and misinformation, they not only conceal unilateral changes to the status quo, but also entrench a perception in the international community which is not based on facts. So in the field of connectivity, in addition to promoting concrete cooperation on the actual situation, Japan and the EU need to work together to ensure that in the international community, factual information and correct perceptions are shared.
Thank you very much. A lot of ideas, a lot of information. So far in the question Q&A thing, I have one question. Has any concrete steps been taken so far to the connectivity partnership? I want Ambassador Vlahutin and Mr. Yoshitake to think about that while we go ahead and listen to our economic people who have been asked for by all the speakers, I think. And I want to start with, because we want innovative ideas. Connectivity needs a large budget. That's what actually we're being told all the time. Joint investment funds was one idea and suggestion thrown up. I don't know whether this is reasonable or not, but I would like to invite our first economic speaker, and that is Miss Flavia Alanza, Director of the European Investment Bank. Welcome, and please answer all our questions about financing.
Thank you very much, first of all, for having invited us and given us the opportunity to speak at this very important and very relevant panel today. The speakers before me have discussed at length how important connectivity is, both for the EU and Japan, and I'm not going to touch upon that. I will try to give a very pragmatic proposal on how we can move forward together to enhance cooperation between the two parties. And but before I do that, let me just say a few words, building on what you just said. What does it take to finance connectivity? After that, I'm going to explain for those participants who do not know as WGIB is, and finally I'm going to touch, this is going to be the bulk of my presentation, how we can enhance cooperation between the two parties. So what does it take to develop connectivity? First, as everybody said, it takes a lot of finance. It takes a lot of finance in the billions, and it takes a lot of finance from all sources, from the public sector, because there are some infrastructure which are of a very important, with a very high economic viability, but not necessarily financial viability. And those have to be financed by the public sector. And to make that possible, we need to ensure that we minimize the cost on the budget. And we minimize it by providing projects that have that are optimally structured in technical terms, but also in financial terms, and we, to the extent possible, provide an important grant component. Sorry, it's not the COVID, it's just the autumn. Then we have projects that have a high financial viability and which can be financed by the private sector, and there too, MDBs, commercial banks, they have to come together to ensure that debt and equity are available for these projects. But to make this possible, we also need a lot of know-how, which both Japan and the EU have, and we must be able to make this know-how available to our partners, especially in the emerging countries. And we can do that through technical assistance, to governance, to make sure that the appropriate regulatory and institutional framework is there, technical assistance to prepare investment projects, to implement these projects, and to ensure, and this is something that is too often forgotten, that maintenance and upgradings are there throughout, so that the infrastructure doesn't deteriorate. So what can we do to do this? The EIB is the bank of the European Union. We are owned by the 27 member countries. We are a non-profit bank, and we work essentially within the European Union, where we implement the policy of the EU. I mean, I think this is very important because what I says will reflect what Ambassadors Flor, Ambassador Lahut, it says we are the bank of the EU, and we implement in financial areas EU policies. So in Europe, to be very short, we foster economic integration, EU competitiveness, and the long-term sustainability of the economy. And outside the European Union, on which concentrate, we finance development. And in the neighborhood, which means the countries closer to the European Union, the MENA region, the countries east of Europe, Africa, we also ensure a better integration with the EU economy. We are a very large bank. We have the turnover of about 70 billion a year, of which about 10% goes towards the non-EU. That's a statutory limitation, and 90% in the EU. So, because of this background, because of our goals and our role as a EU bank, connectivity plays a major role in our business, both in terms of physical connectivity infrastructure and digital connectivity. And outside European Union, I would say that about 1 billion a year goes into 1 billion, even to between 1 and 2 billion a year go to the financing of connectivity. Examples were given. I can give some more examples during the discussion if there is an interest, but we have worked a lot in developing transport networks connecting the East to Europe, in energy connection both with the East and with the South through submarine cables, telecommunication cables, and digital communication. But as I said, more examples can be given later. And because of this cooperation between Japan and the European Investment Bank is not only wished, but I think it's a must. It's a must which we recognized already through the signature of MOUs with the Japanese agencies, with JICA, with JICA. But as it was said, although we have been together in a number of projects, this is more the result of it's not something that was done on purpose. It was a coincidence, and this is what we have to work on to ensure that we can work better together. Now, let's see why this is only the result of coincidence and nothing. Probably because we speak with. Perhaps historically we had different regions of focus, although now this is changing. Perhaps because in each country we spoke with different counterparts. Our counterparts are normally the Minister of Development, the Minister of Finance, JBIC or JICA may have different ones. So let's see what we can do. I think there is a two-pronged approach to follow.
Yeah, maybe we can come back. Your time is running out.
Okay.
Either you say it now or you come back during the discussion.
As you prefer.
Is it a short thing you have?
I can be very short, and then I can perhaps elaborate on that. Let's work more at country level to establish what it is that each of us does. Let's see what our priorities and what our funds are in each country and how we can put them better together to finance projects or objectives that we have in common. And let's start small. Let's start with pilot projects where we can learn to work together, where we can see what are the obstacles that prevent us from working more together. Procurement was one example, there may be others. And let's see how we can move away from those obstacles. Once we have done this, it's easier. We can build on that, and then we can build a joint instrument, joint funds, join the project financing facilities. That the sky's the limit. But let's do it slowly and very pragmatically.
Thank you very much. And let's come back to your suggestions in the discussions as well. Now I want to introduce our Japanese speaker, Mr. Masayuki Tanimoto, Managing Executive Officer, Global Head of Infrastructure and Environmental Finance Group at Japan Bank of International Cooperation. How do you see this from a Japanese perspective?
はい、ありがとうございます。JBIC の谷本と申します。
Thank you very much for your introduction. My name is Tanimoto from JBIC. JBIC, when a Japanese business is making exports or make investment overseas, we provide assistance to them. It is very what important for deepening the EU-Japan cooperation is to enhance the cooperation at the private sector level. And we have created 4 categories to explain that and try to explain the progress and outlook for each category. So Japanese company and companies in EU make joint investments. That would be the first category. So if there is an infra project, the loans and investments are used. So when it comes to loans, with EIB, maybe we can extend loans. But investments, we always have shortage. So Japanese business and EU businesses would complement each other in providing necessary investment. And I think this is quite important. In 2017, in Egypt, there was a project of wind farm in Egypt, and Toyota Tsusho of Japan and Engie in France were involved, and we provide assistance here. And last year in Morocco, Mitsui and EDF Group made investments again into the wind farm project. We extended loans as well. July this year in Qatar, Marubeni and Total jointly made investments to photovoltaic project. Once again, we provided support. The relationship between Marubeni and Total are quite interesting. In 1990s, in Qatar, for the first time, there was an LNG project. And then those 2 companies were the members of the consortium. And after 20-some years from that project, they are now working together again in the new project, which is very interesting. So if you look closer, those 3 projects show the cooperation between French and Japanese businesses in every case. As far as we know, the joint investment between Japan and other EU countries other than French, we don't really hear. So I hope such joint investment will be made with other EU countries, businesses, other EU countries as well. The second category, you can see the icon of building. So the EU company acquired by the Japanese company is receiving assistance from us. So the Japanese companies share the same values as EU, and so they act as good citizens in the EU, and we provide assistance to them. So they have sort of dual nationalities. We extend assistance to Japanese company, but from the European perspective, because they have a subsidiary in Europe, they see this business as a European business. So Hitachi Zosen acquired Hitachi Zosen Innova in Switzerland, and in Sweden they have a waste to energy project, and we extend assistance there. In Italy, Asad RST is a railway company, and Swiss ABB Power Grid acquisition is made by a Japanese company as well. So here's a possibility of us providing assistance to European companies acquired by Japanese companies. So the third icon is a railway icon. So the finance to public sector projects implemented by EU with Japanese corporate participation is the third category. After the Brexit, they are not part of EU, but there was a high-speed railway project by Hitachi, and we were involved in that in terms of financing. So going forward, there's a discussion around Rail Baltica in EU. So there's a railway network of Russia, and so the Baltic countries are joining EU, so this will be a very important project for EU as well. So Lithuanian government has approached us asking for our involvement. So hopefully there will be a participation of Japanese corporates in this kind of project so that we could provide some financing. The next is the green projects and digital projects. With regard to the green projects, especially the offshore wind project and hydrogen or the battery projects to stabilize the grid, those projects are implemented in Europe. So Europe is spearheading in this field. So the Japanese corporates can have experience in Europe and accumulate their know-hows and jointly implement project with European countries so that in future Japanese companies can implement project in the third countries. So for those three categories, we can provide financing through extending loans. The fourth category is about equity participation, what we can do here. So the recent examples would include the project with about CAP, and together with about CAP of Estonia, we jointly established the fund called Nordic Ninja. So this is the name of fund. Panasonic and Honda Motor and Omron, those major Japanese companies are investing into this Nordic fund. The interesting thing about this fund is that the Nordic and startup companies are linked with the Japanese investors. More specifically, through this fund, we provide support to a company in Estonia which offer the platform for taxi arrangement, reservation, and the company is called Bolt. As was mentioned in EIB's presentation, coincidentally, this is the area that we can provide cooperation. So going forward, in Central and Eastern European countries, we see many promising startups. So from the perspective of EU, geopolitically, this is the region which is quite critical. Therefore, in this kind of region, perhaps we can have more cooperation. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this was the speaker with most of the concrete examples that we had so far, but I'm sure we can have many more of those. Thank you all panelists for your talk and your ideas. Now I want to open up for more question and answers and for new ideas from all four of you to each other, but also from the audience. I have one more question from the audience, which asked if there are any priority areas among the 4 areas for connectivity in the EU. Is it transport like a priority area, which seems to have been a priority area when it comes to cooperation with China? Anyway, I would like to let Ambassador Romana Vlahutin in again. Please answer this, and also you're free to give some comments on the other speakers' talk and what you want to bring up here.
Thanks a lot. If I may just go to the first question, which I think is absolutely essential. So what are the concrete things that we have managed to do? And I firmly believe this is really the essence of what we are trying to do here. There are 3 elements. First, we have been very clearly pronouncing our political position on sharing the same principles. I don't think this should be underestimated. It's usually, taken for granted that we are like-minded, but it's very important because connectivity is not value neutral. So when you have a position, it also comes with certain values which I already said, I think raise the bar altogether. The second thing, there is a bilateral element to this cooperation, and there has been quite a lot going on. We have signed a bilateral air safety agreement in June. There has been a lot of work, joint work on the sort of renewable energy, hydrogen issues, and in particular on data governance and trust services. So on the bilateral front, these are the dialogues that have been going on before the partnership, of course, but they are keeping the pace, and they're a very important element of this. Where the partnership brought novelty is our joint cooperation and work in third countries. And this is a little bit of a you know, it requires a little bit of a paradigm shift. And that one does not, of course, with large systems, does not come very, very easy. So in concrete steps, what we are doing, you have already heard that there are a number of concrete projects happening. They're not direct result of the partnership, but they are part of the context in which we operate. And they also show that this sort of, I think Mrs. Alanza said, incidental or not systemic approach makes us less visible. And connectivity really requires a systemic approach, because it will give us a scale that will not only be visible, but very effective as well. In order to do that, what we have now, what we are now doing is we're looking at these 5 regions. I mean, as we speak, there are analytical reviews going on to see where, working together, we can really help and bring the new value in those 5 regions that I have mentioned. It's a work like, you know, looking at the main sort of transport corridors in Africa, looking at the possibility of sort of energy corridors in Central Asia, etc. So these are the things that are very concrete, because we hope they will produce a list of sort of ideas and tangible ideas that can be developed in very concrete projects. And I think in that sense, we need to be a bit patient, because, as I said, this requires a major shift in how things are done. This is why I posed those questions as well, in terms of a single project pipeline methodology approach, or joint funds, or joint technical assistance funds, and etc. I think this is something that we will have to come up with the answers and solutions quite soon, and both on the European and the Japanese side. In terms of priorities, I can't say there is one priority that is singled out, but I think what is a common sense is that we are all putting a lot of emphasis on the digital aspect, because the digital will define all other aspects of connectivity, and it really is bringing a completely new world to us that will have to be regulated. And the regulation of that digital world is something where the partnership is going to be essential, because it touches on many issues that are directly linked with human rights, with rule of law, and etc. So I think if there is one aspect where we can say, you know, all rivers come to one, that's probably digital, because this is what is going to mark our time.
Thank you very much. Yoshitake-san, I want to turn to you and hear if you have any concrete examples. I also like you to touch on what Ambassador Lahutin brought up, namely the political position that connectivity means. somehow in the whole debate here, it's like we have also a white elephant in the room, namely China. How does EU-Japan connectivity connect to the Belt and Road Initiative, for example?
Thank you very much. I'm quite agree with what Madame Vlahovic have said, but in addition to what she has mentioned, first, I want to reaffirm that between Japan and EU, we have already done many projects and cooperation before our partnership. And second, there exist many frameworks, dialogue, policy dialogues, or any dialogues. So we want to utilize these existing frameworks in order to find what kind of coordination or cooperation exists here. Because this connectivity issue, we have to show the international community that Japan and EU are playing a major role in this area. And then the more important thing is that we have to show the developing countries the alternative, because each developing countries want to develop, as I mentioned, but they need the tools, which includes finance. And then, of course, I don't want to blame the specific countries, but to develop, they have to respect international standards. And then for the good practices, Japan and EU are mutually or individually did a good job. So that's why we have to show the good practices, utilizing existing framework. Of course, the cooperation between EIB and JBIC is one of the major framework. So I'm very encouraged by the mentioning of JBIC colleagues. There are already several projects. And then concerning the political significance, I don't want to repeat too much, but I told the relationship between FOIP, Free and Open Indo Pacific, and connectivities. And then Free and Open Indo Pacific concept itself is not exclusive, it's inclusive. So that we don't want to exclude any specific countries. We want to show the way that we are doing, and then we want to show the alternatives. And so that that is my kind of answer to that. And of course, I want to hear more from our colleagues or audience that if they have another good practices or even bad practices concerning the connectivity, so that we can show the international community what is the connectivity, good connectivity or bad connectivity. That is very important. This is my consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have a lot to think about there. We need to show the pattern for others. That's one of the things is very important. I also wanted to let Mr. Tanimoto-san in. There was a suggestion of special funds for increasing EU-Japan cooperation. You mentioned what JBIC was doing in a number of areas. Is there a need for any special funds here? Isn't the main question how to involve private industry also? And here it seems the French are very good at getting projects where JBIC is connected and helping financing. But how about the other countries? How do we get private companies interested in infrastructure projects? Yeah, this was...
ありがとうございます。
Mm.
先ほどの私の
Thank you very much for your question. As I said in my presentation, there are two tools. One is loan and the other is equity participation. And for loans, there is EIB and JBIC, and because of the impact from the policies of central banks, there are a lot of money in terms of debt. So there is not much problem there. So in such a situation, it may not be very effective to create a special fund, but rather what we lack right now is the alliance between private companies between EU and Japan, and the equity participation in certain projects. And from that standpoint, as I said before, this is also related to the question that was posed. We have to strike a good balance between the public and the private. And of course, there are some projects which are politically very important, but rather than that, the business judgment of the private companies must be at the base. Otherwise, you cannot ensure the sustainable long-term development. And I think that's the most important part.
Thank you very much. We have another question here, which I want to address to all of you, which is about the information and misinformation and disinformation relevant to COVID-19. What kind of collaboration is possible with Japanese researchers to address and counter misinformation and disinformation in the digital field? Who would like to take this one?
If I may just go a little bit to the previous one.
Yeah.
There is a very clear question about what are the top 3 systemic factors that hinder cooperation. Because I think it's equally important to look, what we can do and where we are facing certain issues that we need to tackle.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important one, and would also invite colleagues in Tokyo to join, because this is what we have been discussing among ourselves for quite some time. I think the first factor is, I already mentioned a bit, you need to change a bit the mentality, how you work. And this systemic approach is a novelty. Partnership is something that requires, for all of us that are part of it, an agreed systemic approach to issues. The second one are just existing procedures, because we have certain procedures that are different. Our budget cycles are very different. So it's not easy to sort of catch all the elements at the same time. And this is why, sometimes when you can't solve the problem with the existing tool, maybe you create a new tool. So you move to the next generation of solutions, I would say. And finally, for the financing, one thing that we have sort of realized from the very beginning, there is a lot of money, especially on the financial markets. European Union itself, in the European Union, there is around, if I'm not wrong, 31 trillion in different funds. But how do you incentivize this private capital? How do you crowd it? How do you bring it to sort of invest in the markets that are, developing markets are not always either predictable or stable. And this is where the discussion also needs to be. How do we, you said, how do we bring private companies into this? It's easy to bring a private company when there is a good project which is bankable and clear from the very beginning. But sometimes you are in situations that existentially or critical infrastructure is not 100% bankable. And you need to rebalance the risk. You can do it with guarantee facilities, you can do it with blending, so you put a bit of grant in it to make it cheaper, etc. But also a lot of work on regulatory environments. big businesses will not invest in countries where it's not clear in terms of regulatory environment how their investment is protected, what are the rules, and etc. So there's a lot of work in that sense as well. We have often discussed also with private businesses the question of skills. A lot of work needs to be put into that as well. I think our colleague from the EIB mentioned maintenance. So you need skilled workforce that once you bring a sort of a sophisticated technological solution in one way or another, there is a need for skills. So it's a complex set of issues, and I think we understand all of them, and we are tackling them and trying to find user-friendly solutions. This is one thing that for me is a bit of an obsession, because it's a very complex issue, and we're trying to look for the most sort of user-friendly solutions, so that what we are talking is also understandable to those who would use the offer that we can put on the market.
Thank you very much. I think our time is very quickly drawing to a close. Before we do that, I also want to bring the discussion back to COVID-19 and connectivity. I mean, the world is changing. We can see it all in Europe very clearly, but also in Japan, I think, by not having the Olympics, not having any foreigners coming in there, supply chains are having problems and so forth. What are the key? I give you like 20 seconds each to figure out a few words about COVID-19 and what connectivity can do in the next stage to make people recover from the COVID-19 or make societies recover from the COVID-19. Maybe we start with Yoshitake-san.
Yes, thank you very much. Just 20 seconds. So
yeah.
First, we have to live with COVID-19. So, but in order to do that, connectivity is very important from a hard aspect, but not only hard, but also soft aspect. So this kind of webinar is very important, but kind of heart-to-heart connectivity, these are very important things. And one more thing, the disinformation. I want to mention that EU has already have a very good project concerning that. The EAAS has a EU versus disinformation homepage. There are so many examples there. So please look at that. And then that is the reality. And in order to counter disinformation, the keyword is transparency. Positively, we want to make up strategic communications, but also we have to know expressions and actions. We have to look both. That is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Vlahutin. Do you have 20 seconds? How do we do this? You have to demute yourself. Can't hear you.
I'm sorry. First, I fully agree with my colleague Yoshitake-san, and second, I think the challenges of interdependence will require more, not less, multilateralism, and this is something, I think this is one of the strong lessons from COVID.
Thank you. And Mr. Tanimoto?
So with the COVID-19 pandemic, we received a lot of requests for support from developing countries, and we are currently thinking how to deal with those requests. In addition to response to the corona pandemic, we are also thinking about after corona world, especially in the developing countries. I think this is the area that the EU and Japan can cooperate.
Thank you very much. Do we have Ms. Alanza with us as well? Maybe not. She had lots of technical problems. So
no, you have
no?
me, but unfortunately I couldn't hear the interpretation of the Japanese, so I don't know what Yoshitake-san said. On my side, I think what is very important to develop digitalization in the developing countries, because this is what will take them to be able to access the rest of the world in a moment when we cannot do it physically. And this is where our joint effort should really focus.
Thank you very much. I think this has been, I want to thank all the speakers, and I think we had a really good discussion. And yes, it is a changing world, but also to my mind, we got many new ideas on how to move forward. It is very important both for EU and Japan to be on the alert now when things are changing and when we have an opportunity to build a sustainable world, peace and prosperity together. Green recovery has been the overarching theme of this webinar series, and I think it should be that in the future as well. Even if this is the last seminar in our series, I'm sure that the EU and Japan will continue and be more concrete than ever this time. This time is coronavirus, of course, it implies a lot of human suffering and so forth, but it is also a chance to really change societies and go forward in a sustainable way. And I think that is what both EU and Japan intends to do, both in our own countries and also in third countries. So we should go on, take this opportunity and go on, increase cooperation among us. And even if this is the last webinar in this series, I'm sure we are going to come back with new ideas and new projects, and hopefully in a short while we will, or as soon as possible, I hope that we will be able, even if we live with the corona, to also meet live and to go forward in society. Thank you very much for all of you, and thank you also to the audience. We had almost 400 people signing up for this seminar, and many of you have stayed on all through, which is very nice. Thank you.